Hello, I'm Rod Bryant, and you have joined us on Beyond the Matrix, Israel News Talk Radio. Today, we have Dexter Van Zile, and why don't you give a little introduction again?
Well, Dexter Van Zile is one of the most unusual people in this country right now. He's head of Christian media analysis for the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, otherwise known as CAMERA. And I have known him basically for close to 15 years. And he is a stalwart supporter of Israel, and he's a vigorous opponent of Christian anti-Semitism.
And what I like about him, he does his research, and none of it's flimsy. It's solid research. And when he comes out against an individual or a group of people that are anti-Semites, he calls it like it is. And what I really appreciate is the fact that he, being Catholic, is not withholding criticism of some Catholic leaders who has a very anti-Semitic message. And so today we're going to be talking about everything that's worth talking about. Jerry, do you have anything else you want to add to it?
He's talking about a malefactor guy by the name of E.F. Jones,
yes,
who's been all over YouTube and been associated with an international neo-Nazi movement.
Right. And hard to believe that within the Catholic Church is a group of or individuals that are teaching this hateful speech. And the scary thing is this: millennials are biting it by the droves, and it's got a big YouTube audience. So we're going to give you the information to know how you can combat this. Don't go away. We'll be right back after these messages.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome to the second segment of the show. I'm Rod Bryant, along with Jerry Gordon. We have an amazing guest lined up for you. Of course, you heard us talk about it in the intro, and it is Dexter Van Zile. We really appreciate him coming on from Christian media analyst at CAMERA. That is an acronym that we'll explain a little bit more, but his reports and commentary can be found on CAMERA's website, which is, and I'll give it to you real quick so you can go to it while we're talking. It's CAMERA, CAMERA.org, and some very, very good, solid analytical research there. We're going to get right into the first question on this interview. Dexter, first of all, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
You're an amazing man. We appreciate the work that you're doing. You have revealed a bizarre, growing fascination of Catholic millennials with hate-driven, sort of anti-Semitic and racist doctrine of Michael Jones. Who is this guy? How dangerous is his views? Could you give us a little history?
Well, I didn't know anything about this guy until a couple of months ago, and he was interviewed on the podcast of somebody that we've already spoken about, a guy by the name of Owen Benjamin, who is up in Washington State. And this guy, he calls himself operating out of the dead center of Catholic tradition. He lives in South Bend, Indiana, near Notre Dame. He doesn't teach there, and he taught 1 year at St. Mary's College, which is near Notre Dame, and lost his job after 1 year. And he says that he lost the job because the feminists kicked him out because of his opposition to abortion. And I don't know whether or not that's true. But basically what has happened is that he's one of these conservative Catholics, which is fine, that blames the Jews for everything wrong with American society and with Western civilization. And he has said stuff as explicitly as that if there weren't for Jews, we wouldn't have abortion and we wouldn't have pornography. He says that pornography is a Jewish industry. And he says explicitly that if it weren't for Jews, we wouldn't have either one of those things in American society. And his message to young millennials, and I think this is one of the problems, I think there's an awful lot of young millennials out there, and he's in his 70s, so he's lived through an awful lot of the history that he tells to these millennials about, and he offers a very distorted view of it. But these millennials are pretty disaffected, and I think that they feel like the public life and life in general in the United States is declining in quality. And they think that a lot of it has to do with the decline in moral standards. And I think he can make a pretty good case for that. And his message to these young millennials is become Roman Catholic, get yourself baptized, get married, have children, and then, fight against the Jews. It's straight up adversus Judaeos. And the thing is that another thing that he's done is that he's worked very hard to recruit and tell white supremacists and white racists, look, you're not going to be able to carry the day unless you become part of the Catholic Church. And the only way that you're going to get the platform and the spiritual strength necessary to defeat the Jews and their role in modernity is to basically enlist the power of the church and also the power of God to defeat the Jews. And it's that explicit. That is
overwhelming information. So is there anybody at the hierarchy of the Catholic Church that's working to combat the situation or to reject his ideas?
I think he's on their radar. I think that's one of the things that I'm pretty confident of because he's so hateful. And I think the problem is that there's a conundrum here. There's a difficulty because one of the things is that if you rebuke him publicly, then what happens is that you draw attention to his work. And then what happens is that a fair number of people will say, oh, who is this guy? I like the cut of this guy's jib.
Right.
But I think that it may take a while, but eventually I think that the Catholic bishops or some bishops will move against this guy. And I don't know how directly they'll refer to his teachings, but I think that I wrote an article about it recently, and I said that 10 years ago, everybody would have ignored him because he would have been selling his books out of his basement, and he would have basically had maybe a few thousand followers, and that's it. But the problem is, and he would have had to, mail order. But the difficulty is now he's on the internet and he's gathering supporters.
That is absolutely devastating. Jerry, you have a question you want to follow up with?
Well, I do. Dexter, as recent as this past week, Mr. Jones has been interviewed where he's espoused this doctrine. Can you tell us about why it's even more disturbing?
Well, I think one of the reasons why it's so disturbing is that essentially, if you look closely at, and I want to be careful not to draw a straight line between the statements that he's made and other people have made, but one of the things that or things that other people have done, one of the things that I discovered is that he had said that he thought it was okay for Lithuanians in Chicago to throw rocks at Martin Luther King. And in the 1960s, during the Marquette rallies, when essentially Martin Luther King went to Chicago from the South to basically try and desegregate Chicago. And the thing that I found appalling is that once I drew attention to that on Twitter and said, look at the type of stuff that he said, this is indefensible. A fair number of people on Twitter came forward and said, no, this is perfectly fine. And I know at this point that we've kind of gone around the bend because of that. And then just recently, there was another video, where he was interviewed. And one of the things that he said is that, there was this young Catholic kid, probably in his 20s, saying, how did pornography get wrapped up in the whole free speech thing? And who is behind it? And it seems oddly connected with the people who are behind the censorship of truth. And E. Michael Jones responded, absolutely, you're talking about the Jews. Pornography is a Jewish creation. Without Jews, there would be no pornography. The same thing with abortion. Without Jews, there would be no abortion in this country. Now, if you look closely at some of the things that the Poway shooter put in his manifesto, and also the same type of things that the Pittsburgh shooter, he legitimized the Pittsburgh shooter's logic. The Pittsburgh shooter went into a synagogue in Pittsburgh and shot up that synagogue because they promoted immigration. And he said that, look, this is one, and E. Michael Jones, and I don't have the quote right in front of me, but he affirmed that logic. And the Poway shooter out in California, his logic he said that the Jews work as a unit, and it was the type of things that could have been lifted directly from E. Michael Jones's writings.
Who besides you in the U.S. Lay Catholic community have criticized Jones about his
I think
doctrine?
at this point, people are, I think I don't want to, I think right now I'm one of the first, but I think over the long, and to be fair, there have been other Catholics who have written reviews of his books historically in the past. But the thing is that this was, we live in a new era since the Pittsburgh shooting. Okay. And also, I don't think that the Catholic intellectual community has really come to grips with the fact that he's been able to use the internet technology to get his message out to young millennial Catholics.
The problem exists in such a way. It's the same thing that we have in most of our world, the busy, sort of a busy conservative individual who's working hard, who's probably not watching a lot of videos online. They have no idea what these people are saying. And the second thing, if they hear about it, they go, they're just nutcases. They'll go away.
Right.
And that's not the case.
Well, yeah, they won't go away, and that's the problem. And one of the things is that there was another individual, prominent Catholic intellectual blogger, podcaster by the name of Patrick Coffin. And he's been on Catholic television and on the internet for several years now. And I don't know his professional history as well as I should, but one of the interesting things is that I challenged him on Twitter. I said, look, you had this guy on your podcast 3 times, right? Or he has. And I didn't even really say anything. I just said that people who help mainstream this guy should be ashamed of themselves. And he came back at me and basically said, I don't agree with everything he said, nor do I know everything that he said. So kindly, please go away. And at this point, I laughed. I was like, anybody that's ever told me to go away has generally found out that I don't go away. But the thing is that Patrick Coffin, for him to pretend that he didn't know about this guy, he's appeared at the London Forum, which is basically a gathering of neo-Nazis. His anti-Semitism is notorious, and that's one of the reasons why people find him attractive. This is a guy that's given interviews on press TV, Russian television. He's been spouting anti-Semitism for years, and the idea that somebody wouldn't know that would be like saying, well, I didn't know Father Coughlin was saying this stuff,
right? But you should know, Jerry. We're going to come back. Don't go away, guys. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. Don't go away. We'll be right back after these messages. This is segment 2 of Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. I wanted to remind you again, we have Dexter Van Zile, is the Christian media analyst at Camera. We're talking about an individual by the name of E. Michael Jones, who has mixed his Catholic doctrine along with anti-Semitism. And we don't want to bring a lot of attention to the guy, but we want people to understand that if you are Catholic, this is a serious proposition, and it needs to be dealt with. His website, if you'd like to go to it, is camera.org, CAMERA.org. Jerry, you would like to lead? Go ahead.
Dexter, isn't Jones repudiating the doctrine established at Vatican II in 1965, which recognized comedy between Catholicism and Judaism?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what he's doing. And he has a terrible beef with the Second Vatican Council and Nostra Aetate, which is the document, which is the title of that document means, Nostra Aetate means in our time. And the thing is that 20 years after the Holocaust, essentially, there was a tremendous effort to kind of rework the Christian understanding of the Jewish people. And historically, they had been regarded as cursed and as the source of all of the evil in the world, and essentially enemies of the church. And what happened was that people said, this is one of the contributing factors to the Holocaust. We cannot let this happen again. And so one of the things that they did was that they said that we're no longer going to hold the Jews collectively responsible for the death of Christ in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. And also we're going to oppose and abhor anti-Semitism in all its forms. And so what happens is that we're no longer going to use the Jewish people as a symbol or a negative foil to the church's gospel and its teachings. And E. Michael Jones says, no, this is when they got it wrong, because the Jews are the enemies of the Catholic Church, and they have been since the crucifixion, and because of his theology. His theology is that the Jews rejected Logos, or the order of the universe, when they rejected the Messiah. And one of the things he says is that we don't have any right to hurt the Jews, but he tells a story that basically legitimizes violence against them, because if all of the things that E. Michael Jones said about the Jews were true, essentially they would be eternal enemies of mankind and needed to either be put back into the ghettos or frankly eradicated. And I don't really know how else to put it. And he says, well, I keep telling people not to hurt the Jews, and this is an old doctrine of the church. And one of the things that my response is look, one of the reasons why Catholics needed to be told time and time again not to hurt the Jews was because they had been participating in pogroms for so many years. And so he's telling a story that legitimizes pogroms. And it's exactly the opposite of what Nostra Aetate calls for. And it's clearly, he's basically thumbing his nose at the bishops and the church. And he says is that essentially that the bishops are controlled by Jews. That's his narrative, that the Catholic Church is basically now controlled by Jews. And a few years ago, he was in Ireland, and he lamented the priest abuse scandal, but he said, the Jews and the Protestants are the ones who are orchestrating this scandal to undermine the power of the church, to make the world free for mammon and usury.
Dexter,
that's an almost exact quote.
I don't understand. I mean, to us, this seems absolute insanity, right? It just makes no sense. How does this stick? I don't understand how he can throw this against the wall and it sticks. How does it resonate with people? Why do you think?
Well, I think one of the things is that there's an awful lot of angry, unhappy people, and they're looking for a scapegoat. And that I think that's really, you would think in the 21st century that we would know enough about ourselves and about human nature to understand that this is like 1870s anti-Semitism, or this is the protocols of the elders of Zion.
Right.
And the thing is that I think he's part of a larger phenomenon. Whenever people's millennial hopes are dashed,
mm-hmm.
and they discover that the human condition is marked by real tragedy that's unavoidable, they're faced with a choice. Are they going to muster the courage to look within, to figure out how they got it wrong, or are they going to look for a scapegoat and blame their disappointment and project their misery onto the scapegoat?
We are experiencing that very same thing right now in the United States with two shootings that took place over the weekend. And the first thing that came out of the mouth of many people is to blame one group or the other, or politicians, or you name it. Just go through the list. And one of my central comments for anything that I've seen posted on Facebook when I had a chance to comment is to say that a society that fails to introspect themselves and ask the hard questions without blame is a society doomed to failure. Because what's happening is they're looking for someone to blame because they don't want to take personal responsibility to say, look, this country is vacant when it comes to its morals and its values. And it's disappointing a lot of people. I think a lot of millennials, rightfully so, feel hopeless because it's the way they were raised. Yeah. But no one wants to make that comment, do they? No one really wants to say that.
Well, you see, now that's one of the frightening things, is that E. Michael Jones is appealing to that community. And one of the messages is that he's saying, look, the millennials were badly treated in American society. And what has happened, and the reason why ultimately is that because of the Jewish control of the culture and the economy. And his response to it is to tell the young millennials, become Catholic, get baptized, get married, start a family, and return to the true doctrine of the Catholic Church, which is hostility towards the Jewish people.
Wow.
And the thing is that he says that ultimately the church needs to work for the conversion of the Jewish people into the Catholic Church. But he doesn't explain what happens when the Jews don't convert. And he doesn't answer that question. And the fact is that he interprets Jewish identity explicitly. He says Jewish identity is a negative. It is a rejection of Christ. It is a rejection of Logos. It is in opposition to the church. So he basically deprives Judaism of its moral force, of its teachings, and he portrays the Jewish people as some sort of negative backdrop to demonstrate the superiority of the Catholic Church.
So it won't be long before they're going to start dehumanizing them as well.
Well, you see, he gives a different approach depending on who his audience is with. He engages in pretty close dehumanization when he talks to the neo-Nazis, okay? And the videos are out there. There's a video of him speaking at the London Forum, and it's pretty clear that the hostility is just palpable. And he jokes about having an interview or meeting with and talking with David Duke, okay?
Wow.
And he says, "You guys know David Duke," and they all cheer. They say, "Yeah, we know David Duke." And he says, "Well, 3 cheers for David Duke," okay? But then when he gets on a video with some of the other people who would not tolerate that, he tones it down. There was one person who interviewed who was in charge of a group called Catholics Against Militarism. And he didn't engage in nearly the same level of contempt towards Jews, but the narrative that he told was largely the same. Depending on his audience, he will either ramp up the hostility towards Jews or kind of dial it back. With Patrick Coffin, that prominent Catholic YouTuber, who's, he's got a fair, at least decent audience. He mentioned very little about the Jews. Oblique references. He's got a book called the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit and its Impact on World History. They mentioned the book, but they don't really go into an awful lot of the polemics. It's almost as if my guess was that Patrick Coffin said, "Hey, lay off the Jew stuff." I hate to be so blunt, but that's what I think happened.
Wow. Interesting. Jerry?
So, Dexter, this is all kind of interesting. Jones is something worse than your crazy uncle in the closet, isn't he? And the issue before us is you appear to be one of the few individuals within who has really gone after this kind of libel hatred. Why is it that, for example, the U.S. bishops hasn't picked up on this? Or even, for example, I don't know what diocese he belongs to, but I'm sure this has come to the attention of the staff of that diocese.
You have less than a minute.
Okay.
Is that true?
I think, there's a bind because, and I think we are going to see some sort of response to it. And I think, and I hope it's measured, and I think it will be. But also I think it's going to be, clear and definite. But the problem is that if they excommunicate this guy, they're going to turn him into a martyr, and that will make it even worse.
Wow. So this guy, matter of fact, folks, if you really want to get some more information, the article that was written August 2nd, a Catholic writer said it was okay to throw rocks at MLK. A great story. Look, this is now manifesting itself at some level in racism. And, well, it is racism. But they're not just going to stop at Jews. If you think that's the question, the solution, that, well, they'll just do it to the Jews, they won't do it to anybody else. Not true. We know that history shows that they go to the Jew first and then others after that. Very important for us to remember that. Dexter, you're going to stick around for the third segment. We want to continue with this great line of thought. The third and final segment of Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. We have Jerry Van Zile on with us right now, and we're talking about the position of the Catholic Church, or actually one or two of the people in the Catholic Church who are they considered writers, scholars? What are they, Dexter?
E. Michael Jones is, he is basically somebody that's been publishing and writing for quite a long time, since like the 1980s, I think, basically promoting kind of a very, very conservative right-wing view of the Christian faith, which is fine. But increasingly over the course of his career, he's promoted, more and more hostility towards Jews in his writings. And so it's a troubling thing to try and figure out what to do with him.
Well, Dexter, we can't do much about him. But what about the Vatican itself? It doesn't have exactly a fulsome relationship with the state of Israel.
Well, in 1994, it signed basically a kind of a treaty with both the Israelis and the Palestinians, a recognition of both communities. And the thing is that I think one of the things, and that was really actually, I think, kind of a great leap forward. One of the things that I think sticks in the craw of people is that essentially it still hasn't recognized that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel and of the Jewish people. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the fact that I think that the church still is having overall, and Christianity in general, is having a difficult time coming to grips with the fact that the Jews were a sovereign people. And that has been an issue that's been troubling the faith since Israel's creation. And actually since when it looked like the Jewish people were going to have a sovereign state, there was a lot of people that were offended by it. But one of the interesting things is that also it has to do with the fact that there's a Christian population in the Holy Land that will be subjected to hostility from the Muslim majority in Palestinian society should the Vatican acknowledge Jewish control over Jerusalem, because this is one of the things that I've seen and read about. When they redid Catholic theology regarding the Jewish people, and when they issued Nostra Aetate in 1967 and said, we're no longer going to hold the Jews collectively responsible for the death of Christ, there were an awful lot of, there was one community in the Middle East that said you shouldn't do that. And that was Muslim intellectuals. They said, no, you need to maintain your understanding of the Jews as a deicide people. And one of the reasons why they wanted that, and let's be clear, Muslims do not think that that Jesus is the Son of God. They don't think he was crucified, but they do say that the Jews bragged about killing Jesus, okay? Why would they get involved with this issue of Catholic doctrine? And it had to do with the fact that if the Catholics showed any sympathy towards this issue, it was going to legitimize Jewish sovereignty. And this is the issue is that it's called supersessionism. Christianity is dealing with the notion that it has replaced the Jewish people. And Islam operates under the notion that, or historically it's operated under this notion, and maybe it'll change, is that they have essentially superseded both Jews and Christians, and that they are essentially the people who have the only claim on God's love on the planet. And so if the Catholic Church affirms the presence of Jews in the Holy Land, that actually undermines Islamic supersessionist attitudes towards both Jews and Christians. It sounds complex, but I think that's what's going on.
But does that explain why the Vatican went out of its way to recognize the Palestinian Authority?
Yeah, I think so. Because essentially, look, the Palestinian cause up until recently was de rigueur. If you wanted to have decent relations with Arab and Muslim leaders in the Middle East, the one thing that you had to say was that, the Palestinians have been subjected to a terrible injustice. And you had to essentially be very quiet about any of the injustices that the Palestinians may have inflicted on the Israelis as well. And I think, this is one of the things. I've got a little hobby horse issue is that essentially, a lot of people will like to condemn Israel, but they will not speak honestly or publicly about Muslim invective towards Jews coming from, say, like the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they're reluctant to speak about it being preached in mosques in the United States. That's, I think, beginning to change because people are starting to realize that's a real danger. But the thing is that people will condemn Israel left, right, and center, but they're very reluctant to condemn Muslim hostility towards Jews and Christians, in part because they're afraid. That's part of it. I think and the thing is that if you offend Jewish sensibilities, you might get a letter from Camera or the ADL.
Mm-hmm.
But if you offend Islamic sensibilities, and really enrage, jihadists, they might kill you. And there are an awful lot of moderate Muslims that want to change how their faith is practiced in the modern world. But they got a lot of work to do.
Well, absolutely. There is a statement that I've often made that's like when someone says, well, we really can't afford to say anything because if we do, they'll hate us. They'll hate us even more and kill us. And I'm going, what do you think they're doing now?
Right.
They're doing it already. So you're not going to cause a person who's vile and hateful and full of hatred toward humanity to be more hateful and vile. If they're there already. And, God willing, the normative Muslim world will find a way to sort of axe that off of themselves, eradicate it.
Yeah.
Dexter, what is the story about the Latin Patriarch in Jerusalem, sort of church there?
Well, historically, that position, when I first started doing this work, I think, and that was back in 2005, there was an individual by the name of Michel Sabah that he was an Arab Christian living in Jerusalem, and he was the Latin Patriarch. And he would say stuff like jihad is the law of love. And he basically kind of, he was a dhimmi. I don't know if your listeners are knowledgeable about that, but essentially a dhimmi is somebody that takes second-class status in a Muslim-majority environment because they're a non-Muslim. They're most likely a Christian or a Jew. And what he did was he would basically, demonstrate his value to the Palestinian Authority by beating up on Israel left, right, and center. And then he was replaced a few years ago, I can't remember the exact dates, by somebody with the last name of Tawal. And right now, and he wasn't as bad as Michel Sabah. And then now the position is held by an Italian by the name of Pizzaballa. And he's actually, he's much better than the previous two, I think. He's, I think, called an apostolic administrator. And the thing is that if push comes to shove and the heads of churches in Jerusalem have to get together and sign an anti-Israel statement, he will probably sign it, but he doesn't do it with the same enthusiasm that, say, some of the other people's who, like the Orthodox leaders will do once these statements are issued. And he's actually, I think, a lot more sympathetic to the cause of interreligious dialogue, and basically much more sympathetic to the notion of Jewish sovereignty as well.
Dexter, go ahead.
Not an Arab.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question when we have just a couple of minutes away. I hear this, I hear what you're saying, and it just seems, I don't want to think that there are people out there, especially in a religious world, that would think this way. You don't want to think that about people. And you want to think the best, but it's obvious that there is something majorly wrong here. What can the average person do? I know in Judaism we work hard to expose anti-Semitism, we speak against terrorism, et cetera, et cetera. But what can just a regular person do?
Well, I think a lot of it's up to the Christians. And I also think a lot of it's up to the Muslims who engage in these issues as well. But essentially the one thing is, and I kind of get theological on this, is I say, look, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, we all argue about a number of things. But the one thing that we all seem to agree on is that God stayed Abraham's hand. Mm-hmm. He restrained the blade. And that, I think, is a huge theological issue or challenge. And I think that for Christians, we have to ask God to kind of restrain the blade of hate and hostility in our hearts. And the thing is that I think that is, the one thing that, and I don't do it often enough. And I should probably do it more. And I think that we should all beg God to restrain the blade our collective hearts.
That's
And
right.
and the thing is that society is general. I think this is an individual issue that we're going to have to manifest publicly. And I think that it's going to take some sort of spiritual awakening in all of our hearts. And my challenge to the people who are following E. Michael Jones, is this really the path that you want to go down? Because essentially, Christians have been placing asterisks on the commandments against murder and bearing false witness for a long time, and we need to get rid of those asterisks.
Absolutely. Very well-spoken words. Thank you for being such an important part of defending the Jewish people. We need people like you out there. God bless you. God bless your research. And Dexter, thanks for coming on the show once again.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmo, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.